This video will be a pretty straightforward one. It's called The Power of the Analytic. By that I mean the importance of making analytic arguments in more policy-centric debates instead of just relying on reading cards for the entirety of the debate. So the first question is, why are analytics strategic? So I put this in quotes, not because anyone really said it, but I mean, it probably should be a real phrase, that a good analytic is certainly better than a bad card, and can be as good as a good card. By that I mean that, like, a lot of times people read evidence that is good in a vacuum, but often doesn't connect super clearly, even assuming the best version of a card, which you frankly shouldn't ever assume because a lot of cards are very bad, doesn't mean that things necessarily connect. So, for example, someone can read an absolutely fantastic card that the economy, like that economic decline causes nuclear war, and then read a super fantastic card that whatever the plan affects is key to the economy. But that doesn't mean that like their scenario necessarily lines up. So for example, maybe their card that like the plan is key to the economy is really about it being key for fast growth, not about like it causing a quick economic shock that would devastate the economy. There's a disconnect between the two pieces of evidence, despite each piece of evidence in a vacuum being quite good. So in that case, you reading some cards that are like, economic decline doesn't cause war, the plan's not key to the economy, sure, useful, but don't attack the biggest problem. Instead, it's better to make smart analytics that highlight the fundamental inconsistencies of those positions. That's useful both on the AV and the neg. In the 1AR, it's often strategic, because you might not have time to read a bunch of cards on positions and might have to be selective. And being able to make smart analytics can either force the 2 and R to read cards or just give you devastating defensive arguments, quite honestly. That if a scenario truly doesn't line up, there are no number of cards they can read, and lets you defeat a position in very little time, and then focus on reading cards and answering more thoroughly the positions that are most threatening. And generally speaking, these are the truer arguments and more highlight the logical flaws within positions, because again, most scenarios people read in debate are cartoonish. There's a reason why these things have not happened, and if you can think about some of those real problems, it makes debating it a lot easier. And like I mentioned before, it's very efficient, so in the 1AR, it helps you get through stuff more quickly. In the 1C, when you make a bunch of analytic arguments in addition to reading a bunch of cards, you force the 1AR to either read new cards or just can collapse and really explain a bunch of these analytics in the 2 and R to really help deconstruct a case. I think that's often a very effective way of case debating. So the idea of how to do them is fairly self-explanatory, but a lot of people seem to kind of get caught up when it comes time to think about some of them. So the most important thing is to really just brainstorm logical problems. This sounds like it's obvious, but it's harder than it sounds. The kind of heuristic that I like to use is to think about it as if you were talking to someone on the street. You were to show them a case and say, this is what's going to happen next year. What do you think? And all of the arguments they would think of for why this is totally crazy are arguments you should then be able to translate into a speech. Or better yet, if you, after a debate, lost to a position like this and were just kind of trash talking it to your coach, you were like, this is a totally ridiculous position, here's why. What are some of those problems? And then just kind of channel those into a speech is the way that I would think about it. Because most of these positions, like I mentioned before, are not logically sound. They have a lot of shortcomings, which is why most scenarios in debate have not happened, and can therefore be problematized. One of the best ways to do this, aside from just thinking intuitively, is to scrutinize their evidence. Don't just trust them to accurately, summarize their evidence in the tag. Certainly don't just read the tag, and certainly don't just read the highlighted parts of the card. You should read the ununderlined part of cards, or better yet, read the full article. You can cut counterplans from like 1AC evidence that say, for example, X other thing is more effective and could be done. You can highlight a bunch of alternative causes that should trigger those scenarios, stuff like that, and also be able to highlight inconsistencies. If you, for example, like I talked about the econ example before, if you reading the internal links to their evidence see that the card they tag is economic decline causes war is really just about a loss in like a quick economic shock, and their internal link evidence about the plan is about like speeding up growth. Those are just two things that don't align, and you can highlight those inconsistencies and read recuttings of a lot of their cards. Um, the final thing is just to use your brain. People often get channeled into a we need to read a card to answer everything they've said mentality, but you're smart, you know about the world, and just make intuitive arguments. That's really what makes this so much easier, and it enables you to quickly deconstruct positions without having to spend a bunch of time.